fast on sticking to these two items.
We'll go ahead and start the work session for the Raymore City Council for Monday, October the 16th. We have several items on the agenda tonight, and we'll go ahead and get started on item A, which is the Lucy Webb Dean Avenue roundabout feature. Go ahead, Mr. Fearborn.
Thank you, sir. Several months ago, the City Council had asked staff to get information together and pricing together regarding the Lucy Webb Dean Avenue roundabout and the elements that would be involved with having a roundabout feature honoring the armed forces down at that particular location. The information relative to this is attached as the first attachment on here. Amidst a number of options that had been provided, tried to kind of glean it down to two items. One would be the idea that each of the armed forces would be memorialized on a granite obelisk, which is, you can see the picture, the first picture that is provided is what they would be on, 48 inches high, as opposed to a medallion being affixed to it, which could either be stolen or damaged a lot easier. The idea would be to, from the experts, was to actually engrave these, and you see what that would look like in the black granite. Now, of course, this is just black and white, but each of you would have probably seen on the online form that we sent you, it would be a black granite with the engraving in that. The obelisk would not be lit because on a black granite background with an engraving, if they are lit, they disappear at any given time during the evening. So the obelisks themselves would not be lit. Two options for the center. One is a 10-foot high, 10-foot wide pool fountain, and you see the costs associated with that. The outside, the same either way. You see the $39,395 for that. Second option, considerably less, would be to put a flagpole of the exact same height as we have here on a 6-foot pad. It would be a sleeved flagpole, and it would be lit 24 hours a day. The amount for that particular one is $24,300. Total budget available still within this fund, because it was a CIP project, is $26,249. If the council were to move forward with this, staff would be recommending alternative number 2. Number 1, because of the money, but number 2, the flagpole just seems to be the more appropriate center. Hope that provides the information that the council was looking for with this particular item, and would be open to any questions you might have.
You don't happen to have an artist rendering of it yet?
No, not like if you can just picture it, though, it would be 5 of these spaced exactly around the outer edge of the circle with plantings in between, and then the 6-foot patio. The planting area would be pretty small, though.
Okay. Mr. Kellogg?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I remember very well the discussions that took place several months ago, and council agreed that a fountain there was not the safest option because of the water splash and people driving on it and driving in it, and possibly motorcycles, convertibles, and such like that. So I would definitely not be supportive of alternative number 1, even though staff is saying that their suggestion is number 2, and I'll stop my comments at that.
Mr. Burt?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A question about the obelisks. Are they on the top? Are they 2-sided, or are they true obelisk with 4 sides?
It would actually be a 4-sided, like the Washington Monument.
So a true obelisk. Okay, thank you.
Point of using those is to avoid having birds use them as perches.
I think that's, it should be a true obelisk for that reason as well.
Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Will there be any provision to keep from, you know, a runaway truck or a bus or something from hitting these things since they're right in the middle of a roundabout. If a drunk driver or something strikes them, will they be up high enough or on some kind of a pedestal that if they get struck or hit, they won't be damaged?
If you've been out there, you'll see tire marks through the gravel that runs right up to there is a concrete circle. Everything that he's talking about would be inside that circle. We've not seen him go into that yet. It's not saying somebody couldn't come around through there and continue going straight. Seen it happen before. At that point, you just hope the insurance company will take care of things.
The insurance, we would be covered on insurance if somebody hit one. I'll go ahead and say it because I know that Councilmember Burke is dying to. We all received a video. How long ago was it? About 6 or 7 weeks where the car goes completely over one of them. They can, it's definitely there for the taking.
Mr. Townsend?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I live in the timber trails and do see the tires and the delivery trucks, you know, their trailers going over the berm, but I think if it's within that ring, then we should be good. Quick question on the maybe minuscule, but as far as the size of the flag and what's the plan as far as inclement weather when it's high winds and such, do we, who you know, in retiring the flag when it's damaged, is that a budget item we'd have to, or is it a part of the Parks and Rec?
Parks and Recreation is responsible, just like the flag out here. High winds, they are under, it is under their department to make sure that those flags come down. It is under their department that we have actually a citywide flag retirement ceremony. We use the Boy Scouts, so they're properly retired. Obviously would be lit at all times. And then a very strict schedule of when the flag needs to come to half-staff.
Mr. Barber?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm having I understand the flagpole. I think that would be a nice feature to have it, but having anything in that roundabout, I just have a hard time getting a feel of how our citizens can enjoy it. As you go through the roundabout, you got to pay attention to your driving, and I think I timed it. It takes less than about 10 seconds to come in and get out of the roundabout, and I don't see how having a memorial in there can be really used as a memorial. It'd almost be like burying somebody there, and then you couldn't go put flowers on it. You couldn't do anything. You couldn't put coins or do anything that you normally do. And so kind of the idea I had was either, you know, do the U.S. flag and then maybe flags of the branches, you know, in there, and that way you could view it away, you know, obviously away from, not have to be in the center of the roundabout, or take those granite pieces and have them put at the corners, like where the sidewalks are, have the flag in the middle, and then have the armed forces at each sidewalk area there, so people could go to those points and reminisce or whatever, have you know, a moment of prayer, whatever they do at these type of things. But having it in the center, I think we're reselling. I think it's nice to have something, but I don't think that's the place to do it. From a safety standpoint, and then from a utilization standpoint, just having a hard time wrapping my head around how, you know, it's going to be in there, and then people are going to go, what is that? I don't know, you know, I don't know, and then you know, we have to set back with a pair of binoculars or something from the sidewalk, to, you know, to look at it, type of thing. So that's just my 2 cents.
Okay, Sonia?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I agree with that, and I know, kind of like Kevin brought up, that was a concern in one of the designs we previously had for the roundabout circle, was having artwork displayed there, and that, you know, we don't want people to slow down and look at the artwork. It doesn't, the middle of the roundabout doesn't provide an opportunity for people to walk up and look at the artwork. So I kind of agree with Kevin on that, that I'm not sure this is, I like the idea, but I'm not sure the middle of the roundabout's actually the best place for that. Also on that note, I'm just curious, how many other places in the city do we have some kind of memorial or display for armed forces? That was one of my questions. And then I'm still, maybe I'm living in the past. I'm still hopeful that we can get some nice artwork to put in the middle of that, something that you can drive by and kind of even at a glimpse admire and maybe see something different every time you go through there.
You want to answer the first question?
The only other memorial like this that I am aware of would be the Blue Star Memorial, but that's more for roadways. It's not actually a space, if you will.
Is that what's in front of the old Orchlands building?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And then the only other thing we have are the veterans purchase bricks that are at the flagpole there at Tibiana. But there's no recognition there. Those are individual bricks.
Did we have a Eagle Scout that did a project in one of the parks, I was thinking?
Where's Nathan?
Not that I'm aware. If he did, it wasn't announced. I'll check with Nathan tomorrow and let you all know.
Mr. Moorhead?
Well, I tell you what, I'm a strong supporter of Alternative 2, both cost, but what this represents. And I was speaking to my father this weekend, and my father is one of the oldest living councilmen now here in Raymore. And he brought us here in '72. He was, his last assignment was brought out to Richard Scabar to help decommission the base. And he was reminding me Raymore was really started to grow because the officers that could live off base wanted to live someplace other than Belton. And that's how Raymore developed. And Raymore has a long history and kind of what I'd even say a disproportionate representation of our military here who have kind of planted themselves, grown their families here, and we don't really honor that enough. And philosophically, though, hearing what I'm hearing from others about the roundabout, I don't disagree. I mean, the problem with anything in the middle of a circle is you can't get to the circle unless there's parking in the middle of the circle. But today when I was driving downtown I was driving down 39th Street and I came back 37th, and there are a number of roundabouts in the Kansas City area, and they have statues in them. Ward Parkway, they have that huge fountain. And then it really kind of hit me, all of them have things in the middle, and when you're driving by, yeah, most of the time you're really not staring at them. But at the same time, you do know if I said certain fountains or certain roundabouts, you'd know what was in the middle of it. And for me, I actually like the symbolism of it in the middle because I drive that roundabout almost every day going to work. And when I hit that roundabout, no, I'm not sitting and reading every obelisk, but at the would be. But at the same time, I'd be looking at it and just taking a brief moment to realize who's there while my day-to-day is going on. And then it kind of hits me that that's actually what the military is. So actually the symbolism of it being there, maybe not always where you can walk up and put flowers, and I know there are wonderful memorials that can do that, but it's still a representation of what they serve in our life. And so I think there is some symbolism to it. Respectfully, we got to do something about the middle of this circle. So whatever we put in there, I mean, what are we going to do? Just plant a bunch of grass and put some flowers? Somebody's still going to say, I wish I could have gone over and smelled some of those flowers. So do we buy the corner and put a parking lot? I mean, there's a certain point where we got to do something. This is tasteful, it's direct, it's relevant to Raymore, it's honorable, it honors all 5 branches. I'm glad, actually, the Coast Guard, a lot of people forget about them. But, and like I said, it's very discreet and touching. It wouldn't surprise me if somebody were to pull up along Dean or one of those areas you're pulling in the neighborhood and might walk over there. But it does serve the purpose even if we put it in the middle. So I'm supportive of Alternative 2, and I commend the recommendation to do this. So,
Thank you, sir. Jay, did you have something? An add to it at this time? No? Anyone else? Mr. Berenson?
I'll say I'm also, as a veteran, I'm also supportive of it, alternative two. However, if we did decide to change those obelisks to flags, I would also support that too. I think that would be more work for the Parks Department, and maybe some legacy costs with replacing flags quite a bit, but I think it would look really neat also. But I'm in support of alternative two as it's written, or changing it to flags as well.
Mr. Kellogg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And that's exactly what I was going to say is in place of the obelisk, what about 5 flagpoles dedicated for each branch of the military? Standing there proud and prominent, part of the rationale with the height of what we were discussing in the roundabout subcommittee was so it could be seen from 49. And I think, I still feel that's relevant and very important, and I like the idea of the flags, because I can't think of too many other places outside of Branson that really celebrates their veterans on a level like that. I would definitely support that. There was one of my concerns early on in the discussions of the roundabout feature was that we were able to see through it, and I'd somewhat given away on that, but 5 flagpoles there, and possibly with one in the center with the American flag high enough so we could have a Raymore flag underneath it. I mean, the possibilities are endless, of course, but it goes along with budget. But I really like the idea, just thinking about it in concept, of flags, a pole for each branch of the military, plus an American flag in the center.
And not to correct you, but the idea behind this is a memorial to the services, not to veterans. I know it doesn't sound like there's a difference, but there really is a difference. We're actually recognizing the services themselves rather than the veterans of those services. And from a veteran's perspective, there is a difference. So it's not really a veteran circle. It's a service type of recognition. Mr. Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I didn't give any kind of opinion when I asked a question earlier, but I definitely do like alternative 2. I would certainly vote for that. My wife and I, we are not veterans, but we do have quite a bit of decorations in our house that have been in offices of veterans throughout the world, and we definitely would enjoy seeing that in our community as well.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Holman.
I have a question for Mr. Fearborn. If we were to go with the option 2 and replacing the obelisk with 5 theoretically shorter flagpoles and a flag for each branch of the service, does that create any hardship on staff, or any additional concerns that you would have with that change in the project?
On the flag raising and lowering, you're exactly right.
We're going to be there one way or the other. Right now, we go out each morning anyway to pick up one banana peel. And hopefully this would stop that. But no, I don't think so. So we would want them lit. So we may eat into that $2,000 difference a little bit, but the obelisks were pretty expensive. So yeah, I think we could probably shift to the flag alternative if the council would like to see that more. Yes.
Oh, go ahead.
Given that, I would support the option of option 2 with the 5 flag poles around. My reason being is a little bit different than what some other things, but everybody will remember this. We've talked for some years off and on about entrance features, and everybody refers to the gravestone when you come in front of the jewelry store. It's the first thing I thought of when I saw these. The flags will be much more colorful. I think it'll be a much more visual and impressive display. Still be able to see through it, like Kevin mentioned. So I like that option with the flags in place of the obelisk.
Thank you. Mr. Kellogg. Mr. Townsend, actually, you had your hand up before that. Did you want to follow on with that?
My more of an opinion with respect to the flags and the elevation and the time of the day when you're driving with respect to the sun and from a traffic safety perspective with 5 flags, depending on the height of the flagpole and the American flag being a little higher, if that would pose any issues because of the turn coming off of Outer Road and certain residents not necessarily always doing the speed limit and waiting their turn to get through the diagonal. Excuse me, the roundabout, and that's a northeast thing. So that was just a concern with regard to the number of flags and the height and such, if that would be, not knowing what the height is proposed for the flagpoles. So I had not said also, I also recommend option 2 as well, whether it be the flags or the obelisk. Obelisk, yes.
Yeah, I think from a flagpole perspective, what we're looking at is just a heightened base for the U.S. flag. So all flagpoles are probably generally the same in size and makeup, but the U.S. flag is just elevated higher since it's in the center of that. I would assume that's what we would do.
Yeah, yes, sir. And from a traffic perspective, we would probably be gaining sight through the circle and giving up a little bit with people glancing up. So from a traffic safety standpoint, I hate to say one's a push over the other, but that's a practical matter.
Yeah. Mr. Kellogg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One thing I did while I was out of town with my brother and my niece is me and my niece drove up to Sheboygan. Well, I think it was Sheboygan, maybe north of there, to view a sub. But on our way up from the Chicago area up to Wisconsin, we drove by a insurance company that has a flagpole there that's 400 feet tall with a aviation beacon on top of it and a flag that weighs 350 pounds. That's about the size of my yard. And I'm sitting there and I was mesmerized, and I was glad my niece was driving because I got to enjoy that at least 20 miles because I could see it from 20 miles. But even with that said, that does lend part of the caution to people being mesmerized by something that's there. I still like the idea of the flags, but I do have a concern. I agree with Councilman Barber, and it's hard for me to do that after the emotion I went through with the roundabout feature. It really is. But I would think that a flag, the flags would be, I guess, less distractive, less mesmerizing, in my opinion. Don't get me wrong, I love the idea of the obelisk. I really do. But also, if we're going to spend that kind of money, I would really like to have those in a place that we can go up and pay our reverence to them. I just remember so many different memorials that I've visited. Matter of fact, one of them was at the Cancer Treatment Center of America when I was up there with my brother, right across the street from the hospital. I was able to walk across there, and they memorialized all of their citizens that lived in that community that fought and died in all of their wars, in all of our wars. And, it's difficult, and I live in Ward 1, and I also remember getting a picture of a sculpture of a banana peel for the middle of the roundabout of all things. But that's a difficult thing. It's a difficult thing for me. If we're going to spend that money, it's very difficult to walk across the roundabout and get in there and pay reverence. And really, in honesty, it's really not that safe of a place when you sit there and you look at the tire tracks come across those rocks there. You know, I'm totally convinced that on 98% of those tracks that have went through there didn't have to. But still, it's really, there's enough evidence there in the rocks that, you know, I don't think it's a very good idea that we put something in there that will attract people to go over there and pay reverence or pay their gratitude to the people that they're representing.
Anyone else? If not, it sounds like we have a consensus on the flagpoles. You want to kind of work up something with that and see what we can come up with? I don't know if you, with the obelisk, if you guys can come up with an artist rendering, so we have a better visual of what that would look like.
Sure.
Would be kind of interesting to see how those would look.
Okay.
All right. Okay, so we'll move on to the next item. Next item is a Kentucky Road Plan. Mr. Fearborn.
Thank you, sir. I'll ask Mr. Krass to make this report.
Thank you, Mr. Fairborn, Mayor, members of the council. At our last work session, we discussed some modifications to 58 Highway regarding the Kentucky Road Relocation Project, and prior to that, council had seen our proposal for dealing with the divergence at the north end of the project when Kentucky Road heads to the east. Presented that to the Belton City Council that following Tuesday. Received some feedback from them later after the meeting with some concerns of the configuration of the northbound and elimination of the change in configuration for the southbound lane. Based on those comments, we've come up with a newer revised plan that we believe addresses their concerns and will still accommodate the project. What you see there is very similar to what's at near the Harmons off of 58 Highway, where you're still directing or providing an opportunity for traffic to go to the south, and then traffic can continue to the east along the relocated Kentucky for purposes here, whatever that road may be named. The way the project is set up, it can move forward without any further input from Belton on this. We're proposing to set the median a minimum of 6 inches off the center line of Kentucky, which is the boundary line between Raymore and Belton, and we can do that without any impacts to the west side of the road. So providing this is what staff and our engineer is recommending we proceed with, and I'm available for any questions and comments.
All right, Mr. Keller.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What worries me about the median there is two different entities taking care of that during the winter, or currently, we're taking care of one part north or south, am I correct?
We have the entire maintenance of this section.
We have the entire maintenance of both sides.
Right.
Okay, that relieves that. Now, is that into perpetuity, or is that subject to change in the future and that? I just worry about our investment there not having the level of concern that I know our staff has. As far as damaging it.
It is actually memorialized in the agreement that we have with Belton that we have the maintenance of this entire area. It's also memorialized that we have the maintenance of this entire area with MoDOT.
Okay, thank you. That relieves that.
Mr. Holman.
Thanks, sir. Everything we're doing in this plan, it's in our yard, right? Everything, I mean, we're not doing anything on their side. So there was, even if we were splitting the road in half on maintenance, everything we're building here is ours anyhow. So it's on our side of the fence. I think there was an earlier configuration where we were gonna go over a little bit onto their side, but they didn't like that. So we ended up with this, isn't that right?
On the North Kentucky, if the council member was actually talking about 58, there is one sliver of the median that's actually on their side, but the road itself, the entire road itself, we have total maintenance on. They actually do the policing on the north side in this area, and we do the south side, but the maintenance itself belongs to us.
Mr. So if everybody's in consensus here, I guess we'll go ahead and move forward with this potential project. Is there an approval process from this group that you're looking for?
Well, we will be bringing this particular item to you all for the approval. Mike, how is that going to work? We'll be bringing the Kentucky Road improvement to them.
For contract award, we'll be bringing 58 Highway to both the Planning Commission and Council for separate action.
So you'll probably be seeing that. We need to bring the road first, and then we will bring the 58 Highway action, because we have to have the road in place to then have the median. I believe Mr. Carteret was talking about 3 weeks, 4 weeks at the longest before you will be seeing this again. And of course, for the Kentucky Road configuration, because no part of it is on the Belton side, we do not need to go back to them for any sort of approvals.
Mr. Holman?
Thank you, sir. We would anticipate construction in the spring then, assuming everything goes to plan and status quo?
That would be correct, sir. We have to acquire property,
Right.
which will take a long winter.
Sure, thank you.
Mr. Townsend?
Quick question, with respect to addressing, as far as future businesses concerned, will this street be still called Kentucky Road?
I
Question.
Oh, you had to do that. It will not be called Kentucky Road. It will probably not have the word Kentucky in it in any way. We had originally hoped for that. That would be the natural swoop, but we would be taking, there are homes and businesses that would have to, it would change their addresses, it would change their name, and it just doesn't seem to be a very fair thing to be doing to them.
We're going to send it to the kindergartners for a road name contest.
Of course,
they'd probably come up with a pretty good one.
The business going to the west is, as you'll remember, that becomes Dean, but the little U there is actually Clint Drive, so we were thinking about maybe Eastwood Drive.
Oh, I like it. Yeah, there you go. You got my vote. Oh, I don't have one. Darn.
Not my joke, it was Captain Mayberry's, just so you all know.
I like it. Yeah, so road to be named later.
We have been calling it, of course, Relocated Kentucky, and the architects did that as well, and that's actually generated some conversation that we shouldn't be calling it that, so we want to be real careful.
Anyone else? Okay. We'll move forward with that then. Thanks, Mike. Thank you. So we'll move on to the next item, which is the budget itself. This is our last work session prior to the second reading of the budget. So many of those items that we had discussed previously, I'll let her warm up the projector there. I assume you're going to throw it up on the screen, see where we're at right now with regard to the unrestricted fund balance. And then any other items within the budget that you care to talk about tonight, or if there's any questions from the council members, please be sure to bring those up tonight. I'll go ahead and let you take it away then.
Thank you, sir.
You're anxious to talk about it.
Yeah. The first item that the council had asked actually for a report on was to get kind of a very brief overview of emergency management. I believe it was Councilmember Moorhead who had asked that this be brought just in case there were any items that that particular department felt they might need to enhance the work that they were doing.
Actually, I think it was Mr. Holman, wasn't it? Oh, it was you? Oh, okay.
And so with that, I have the chief here prepared to make just a real brief presentation to you all regarding that department.
Thank you, Mr. Fearborn. You probably saw in your budget book, in the budget narrative, and you know, much of what I'm going to talk about what emergency management does, you know, very obviously is planning and mitigation of any type of natural or man-made disaster that might befall the citizens of Raymore. What we hope in that planning is that it never happens. So that's one of those jobs that you hope that you will do nothing but plan and that will never come to fruition. But that's what our director does. And, when Mr. Feuerborn actually reorganized the department heads back earlier this year, Mr. Murdoch became a member of the management team as the director of emergency management, and so now a department head of one, but that reports to the police department. But as I said, that's his sole function is the planning and management of resources during any type of local or regional emergency that might affect our citizens here. That also includes, obviously, the management and organization of our CERT volunteers, of which Mrs. Moorhead is one, and public education, a great deal of outreach to our citizens, the development and update of all policies, procedures, and plans that conform to national and state rules and regulations and guidelines. So lots and lots of policy oversight for FEMA guidelines, SEMA guidelines, to make sure that we are in compliance with any and all of those regulations that will dictate how we operate. So our local emergency operations plan, which is the oversight is provided by Mr. Murdoch, is also guided by all of those rules and regulations. But probably the most important thing that he does in a function of that office is that community outreach. And it's citizen preparedness, and it's talking with homes associations, it's talking with young people, students, and classes. He and I have gone out together, on a number of those journeys to talk to young people about how they can be prepared at home and in the event of any type of disaster. And then, of course, in the event that any disaster should happen, and we've had some, you wouldn't characterize them as disasters, but certainly those types of events like recent rain and flooding events and things like that Mr. Murdoch is very much involved in as well. And so we work together with folks like Public Works and others to make sure that we have the appropriate plans in place in the event that we have an event like that would cause flooding in our community, and we are prepared for that. And he, in those types of instances, is the individual who is in charge of all of us, so that if we activate our Emergency Operations Center, all of us would have a different function where we would be reporting to Mr. Murdoch as the director of the Emergency Operations Center. And we've done some mock activations right here in the council chambers where all of our department heads have come together to make sure that, we all know what our purpose and our function is if we would have to call everybody in the event of an emergency. So operating the Emergency Operations Center and the alternate communication center, because we have a trailer where we could actually operate remotely if that were necessary, he is in charge of all of that. So very, very important function. Obviously, for any growing community like Raymore, we want to make sure that our citizens know that we have, that portion of protecting the community under control, and we have all the right plans in place for that. His position is funded. We have a grant with the Emergency Preparedness Grant through SEMA, and so all of his functions have to be dedicated to emergency operations as a requirement of that grant. So if anybody has any, that's a really, really brief overview, but if anybody has any questions about emergency operations, I'm happy to answer them.
Mr. Moorhead.
When's the next CERT training?
I don't know, but we will figure that out. We had a pretty robust class back in the spring, and I think that we've got some people, we have a Citizens Academy going on right now, and we've had some people express interest that are involved in the Citizens Academy becoming CERT volunteers as well, but I will certainly find that out.
Okay. And I know that I raised the question of this when we were talking about need. For some people here, was it last year? There was actually a budget request. We provided some new communications for the CERT team, some radios. So I know that there has been requests in the past, especially in light of like with the flooding and stuff. Is there any new or any new needs that they would have?
And actually, one of the things is Mr. Murdoch and I talked about this, since you mentioned communications. He mentioned to me that down the road, probably not this budget year or maybe not even next budget year, but our communications trailer leaks like a sieve. And that at some point in time, we have done some stopgap measures to protect the very expensive equipment that we have in there. That at some point in time, we will need to look at, and you've seen the communications trailer. We have it out at the Fall Festival and things like that. The equipment in there is very technical and very important to us. If we would have to move off-site, we will need a new trailer at some point in time.
What would be estimated cost of that?
I knew you were going to ask me that. I knew you were going to ask me
Well, that could be, you could figure that out.
Oh, absolutely. And some of that will be dependent on, the trailer that we have now is a pull-behind trailer. We pull it behind the emergency management truck. If it were to be, I know Mr. Pureborn's preference would be that it was like an ice cream truck and that we make Mr. Murdoch dress up. But if it were some type of truck and trailer that were combined, where, you could drive the truck and the emergency management equipment was contained inside, obviously that would impact the cost. So I don't want to guess, I'll be wrong, but I can certainly find that out.
Well, and there's I've already seen a few nods. I'll go ahead and speculate what I think those nods mean. I'm looking at $422,000 still left up there, and considering that 600 of the encumbrance is just literally protecting for overages, and the idea that an emergency management response team is supposed to be on top of things, the fact that their equipment is being duct taped to keep, because it's leaking, implies to me, shouldn't we go ahead and get the trailer now, since we clearly have more than enough money? Or to at least include it for next year's budget. I'm not making that as a formal suggestion. I'm floating the general principle, but when I'm seeing technically $1 million of overage there, that trailer in that, but with the expensive equipment in it, it sounds to me like, do we really want to wait until a disaster hits and their trailer goes and we lose that equipment because we're being a little too conservative? Thanks.
Any response yet? Because Mr. Kellogg has a question. Go ahead. Go ahead, Kevin.
I'm going to jump on that coattail also. What comes to my mind is not saying that we need a trailer or we don't need a truck. What we need, I believe, is options of what is a possibility. I look at our department and the functions of what our department does just for our police department and the other surrounding municipalities. I have to think that our emergency response would be utilized even more so than just Raymore. I'm concerned with leaks in a trailer and the equipment in it is, yeah, it can be replaced by insurance, but that's a minor concern of mine. My concern is that it works when it needs to work. Nobody knew that when the tornado was going to go through Joplin. Nobody knew it was going to go through Oak Grove or anything. That's my concern. So I'm right there with you. It's just that I don't want to dictate that a trailer is needed or a truck is needed, but I'd like to see options and see what staff thinks is needed. I want equipment if we ever need it and when we need it.
Sir, may I? And probably leaks like a sieve was not the appropriate terminology. Was probably not the appropriate terminology. A couple of years ago, we actually did rubberized on the inside of that. The equipment's not in danger, and I did mischaracterize that. What Mr. Murdoch had said to me when I asked him, because I said likely this question will come up, and I'm going to beat him up when I see him for not being here tonight, but that he said, we will at some point in the future need to replace this trailer. I can assure all of you that the equipment is in perfect working order and it is safe. What we've done to mitigate some of that is to make sure that the trailer is covered when it's not in use, that sort of thing, so that, we're not worrying about it sitting out in the elements to make sure that that equipment is protected. But, I would be remiss if I didn't pass along what he had said with regard to at some point in the future.
And I didn't hang on the leak like a sieve against the program itself. I guess what I'm trying to say, though, is I respect the desire to be efficient and be conservative and cost, but this is the very agency that's supposed to be right on top of things when my community is leaking like a sieve from rain or tornado or thing. And I just want, we have clearly some availability of funds that if there is a need, I'd like to just stress, that's why I'm not making a formal motion. I'd just like to stress that if that department sees that there is a need, even if it's not immediate, let's go ahead and get I would encourage to go ahead and get that discussion started, as Councilmember Kellogg talked about, because we do have the ability to take care of that, and we want to be on top of that. I have some interaction with the county emergency management program, and when some of those rains occurred, not every community was as strong to step up as Raymore's. And I like us being there, but I know that Mother Nature can get on top of us as well too. So I just want to make sure whatever need is there, we have the ability to take care of that. So in support of the program.
Anybody else have anything? Mr. Fearborn.
Would the council like us to explore the options then? Absolutely. And get back to you with some estimates next week?
Before we finalize the budget? Yeah. Should we set aside something tonight? Probably 50,000 at least, maybe set aside to kind of pocket it for that particular purpose. That would probably be plenty. I know a covered trailer like the one we've got runs around 18. I don't know if a vehicle goes along with that or whatever, and you're going to need a $30,000 truck to pull it if that's what you're talking about. Or are you just talking about a trailer?
I think that the second option that the chief brought up would actually be a self-contained vehicle. It would be, she described it as an ice cream truck type, but it would all be one vehicle. I'm like the chief. I have absolutely. We've never looked at this.
Actually, you're starting to talk like a mobile command post now.
Yeah.
And those can get fairly pricey.
Yeah. So. But maybe we take the week to explore the options and bring something back to you at the final presentation of the budget next week.
Kevin's been over there. No, Mr. Holman. Oh yeah, that's it. Go ahead, Jay.
Can we get the RV from Stripes that's fully armored? I know that's really cool. I'd love to drive that.
That would be awesome.
Well, there's a couple ways we can do. We could obviously set aside at least some starter funds. The money doesn't go away just when we approve the budget. We can always come back and do a budget amendment. I'm interested in the concept. I would really like to hear a more in-depth, detailed proposal. What are the costs of these things? What is their lifespan? What's the current lifespan of the one that we have? You talked within the next couple of years it needs to be replaced. What are its capabilities? If you're going to want to move to a trailer to an enclosed vehicle. So, like I said, to me, either we set aside some starter funds or we just wait and hear the presentation. Everybody's in agreement. We go to a budget amendment at that time, or staff prepares a budget amendment in the future.
Not a bad idea. Mr. Kellogg?
And that's what I was going to say is that, and I like the idea of setting aside money for that, but, undesignated kind of, if that's the term I'm looking for, but not forcing staff to come up with something in the next week, because I think that's pretty rushed. But if we have money set aside for that dedication and allow them to do their due diligence as far as research and coming back with good thought-out options instead of just something that was put together in 7 days, I would feel a lot more comfortable with that, you know.
Yeah, I kind of like your suggestion, Jay, that we just leave the money alone, don't do anything. We can come back with a budget amendment later if that's the project. Okay. Anybody else? Okay.
The second item under the budget is Councilmember Moorhead's presentation from last week of the Legacy Tax Abatement Program. The councilmember and I had the opportunity to have a conversation today. I had been instructed by the council as a whole to get some information, some background information relative to this. Couple of, I'll just kind of go down the list here. The first thing that we were able to clarify is the council member is proposing this as it applies only to real property, not personal property tax. So when you're looking at that whole piece of the pie that is called property tax, it would only be the real estate that's associated with that. I had let the council member know there was the question last week about would this be reviewable each year, which staff took to mean would it be reviewable so that it could be retracted or taken back or cut back on. To that end, staff would recommend that if you move forward with this, that it not be considered an abatement, because an abatement would actually be taking it off the books and would require a vote of the people to get it back or to make any changes that you were going to do. So if the council were to move forward with it, we would recommend that it be considered either a rebate or a refund. And that's what you see from other locations. The proper accounting would call for this particular item to be considered a contra revenue, which means while the secondary impact is that it hits your available fund balance at the end of the year, it would actually be considered from an accounting standpoint to be a reduction in revenues, because you would be paying the amount back, refunding the amount back, not through, obviously, if we were doing a refund, it wouldn't be or when the tax bill is actually due, it would be later in the cycle. Tax bills go out in a week and a half. They're already printed, I believe. And so it would be sometime after the beginning of the year that these would be reviewed, or that folks could come in and we could advertise that period of time. So when we paid it back, we would actually pay it back out of the account that the money went into. So in effect, what you're doing is you're not, in the end, you're impacting balance, but you're also impacting the operating fund, between the lines, as I like to call it. The other component of this was the number that was used last week was the total amount of the levy that is associated with this, which is proposed to be 1.2856 for next year. A concern with that is we are talking about paying back out of the general fund to ultimately impact the general fund balance, but the 1.2856 actually represents 3 funds of the council, and the park board and the debt service fund. So you have the general fund, the park board, or the park fund, and debt service, and you would be talking about trying to only impact general fund balance. In speaking with the council member today, I don't want to speak for you, sir, but he had indicated, well, then maybe it should be modified to only impact, the refund should only be that portion that is associated with the general fund, so that we are not impacting debt service and not impacting the park board. Is that a fair?
Actually, the proposal I gave you guys in writing specifically used the phrase "a portion of the ad valorem tax" because I wanted to give the staff an opportunity to evaluate and still leave the ability that we only affect part of it, especially in light of the contra revenue counterpart of this. The intent was the general fund. This, we can still achieve this by leaving the park levy and the debt service levy alone. So it still it still achieves the goal and it simplifies, and that's why Mr. Fearborn and I are in agreement.
It wasn't actually the act that the council member was referencing relative to the first step of the requirement, which was that his intent, I believe, in speaking with him today, was that, in essence, there'd be a home on the property. You couldn't just do this for a piece of property. And he had referenced the homestead issue in qualification number 1. Missouri actually has, not related to this, a Homestead Act, which is if your taxes go up by a certain amount and you meet certain qualifications, some of which are familiar with this, and again, this was not the one that the council member was referencing. If you hit if in a reassessment year, your property tax goes up by more than 5%, the difference between 5% and what it went up, you actually get reimbursed to you. In a non-reassessment year, that amount is 2.5%. So if in a non-reassessment year, your property tax were to go up 3%, you get 0.5% reimbursed to you if you meet certain qualifications, the first of which is you have to have an actual structure and 2 acres, but again, that wasn't the one that was being referenced. So I asked the council member today if there was a person who was taking advantage of the one that is actually in effect in Missouri and getting reimbursed on that. Would it be his intention that this person would still receive the full reimbursement that he is speaking of from the city? And he indicated yes to that. I suggested to the council member, and I believe he was supportive of it, if it goes through, that there be another proof that had to come up, which would be they would have to prove that they were current on their taxes, that they had actually paid the amount that they're asking to be reimbursed. Most of the locations we looked at that are at the state level, they require that investigation go back at least 2 years. Might recommend a little bit longer than that in the final form of this one, because it's fairly easy to look up. I say fairly easy, we have to go to the county website, but we can look it up for years prior to that.
By the way, do you want us to let you get through all this before questions?
If you don't mind, sir. I'm down to the proofs that would be necessary on this, and I think we have these down. Well, first, staff spent the week doing quite a bit of investigation on what we might be talking about. There are a startlingly high number of folks in Raymore who love it here and who have lived in their residences for 25 years or more. To be exact, approximately 350 residents. When you take that amount and you reduce it by the homes that are at the $200,000 market value amount, which is a $38,000 assessed valuation amount, that gets reduced down. We believe that a conservatively high number of homes that could turn into applications for this particular item is 50. When we use 50 homes and assume all of those homes are at the 200,000 market level, which there would be some below, and then apply only the general fund portion, the 44.8 cents that is the general fund, you have an amount to be refunded in total times the 50 homes of $8,512. So the $70,000 that was thrown out gets reduced to that amount. Again, we're using, within the formulary, we're using a number of assumptions. We're having to assume of the homes that are left after the 200,000 number is applied. We're having to assume, based on census figures, age, because one of the requirements is the 65 plus. We're having to assume an AGI, their income level being below the 40,000 amount, which is one of the conditions on this. Those are two pretty big assumptions. That's why we kind of pumped the number a little bit. I hope it would be enough. Again, we consider the 50 to be a conservatively high number. So the amount that could be modified down and still be in a conservative range, we think at this point, having, again, pretty quick research here, $10,000 set aside. The amount would have to be, as it would hit the budget, again, while it would impact the available fund balance, that's a secondary issue. Staff would recommend that from the get-go, the council would actually be amending the budget. You would be amending the revenue component of the budget down by the 10,000 with it for that contra revenue. Proofs. Proof of age would need to be provided, driver's license or a passport. Proof of residence, a utility bill is the norm. A water bill would be preferred. Proof of no property tax due, we would actually have to be looking that up. Most folks don't necessarily get a receipt back. That's not the way they're paid, so we would have to look those up. But we could find them on the county tax rolls. Proof of home value, less than 200,000. Again, we would be able to, or 38,000 assessed. The assessed value and the market value are both listed on the county tax rolls. We would have to look those up. Proof of 25 years at the same residence, a little tougher. Proof of purchase of the home by the individual who's coming in and making the application. Not a lot of people probably keep their utility bills back 25 years. You never know when they'll come in handy. And then one of the tougher ones our thinking on that is if they could provide a utility bill. Otherwise, we might have to go to the county recorder of deeds and do that investigation. Proof of the household adjusted gross income, the AGI. This one would more than likely have to be, because the individuals we're necessarily talking about here may not be paying income tax. So they don't have a tax form to hand us. More than likely an affidavit, a sworn affidavit that they would have to sign, real similar to when you're filing for council. You sign a sworn affidavit and you're kind of held on your honor on that one. Still haven't been able to, we haven't had time to flesh out if somebody lies on the affidavit, what that means, how we would get the money back. But I mean, the affidavit could be produced. That concludes staff report on this item, sir.
I guess one of the current concerns that would come up for me is, and staff spoke about residency. I would think that a requirement would be reasonable that they live here a majority of the time of year. Now, when I say that, I think of snowbirds owning property in a warmer climate and also. Would that example be eligible for the rebate refund? It sounds like that's what we're talking about more than an abatement. My issue with it is that if, quite frankly, the guidelines that are laid out there, I suspect that I will qualify for it. If I live to be 65.
There you go.
And I stay in the house that I'm at. But quite frankly, my means, when I'm 65, I can probably, not bragging, but have dual residency if I chose to spend my money in a warmer climate with another house. It's very reasonable. Now, if I can afford two homes, do I, speaking for myself, I don't think that I deserve tax breaks if I can afford to live in Raymore, which I consider a very nice city, and then another place that I would like to live with a comparable house. Food for thought.
Well, don't forget the AGI is 40,000 as the cutoff too. You're probably not going to be able to afford two homes if you're just making less than 40,000 a year. Maybe you can. Mr. Moorhead.
I'd be happy to, with each question, to give some response or at least show intent. As far as that goes, I would really want to discourage us trying to make sure they have to stay in the home a requisite number of days. This is a property tax, number one, so the ownership would be the 12 months regardless of whether they traveled a little bit. The other thing is, since this is to benefit seniors, I guess what I'm getting at is I don't want to force them to have to be imprisoned in the home for the credit. I mean, if they want to go visit a family or travel for a little bit, that shouldn't be a consideration. So just the fact that they have the home, and yes, the AGI limitation is relatively restrictive to make sure that this is not really to benefit investment property, and that was the purpose of using the phrase homestead in the first element. It was not related to a Missouri Act. It was by definition where we're not giving property breaks to commercial property, industrial property, vacant land. It has to be a home. Somebody has to live in it. Well, but see, the key is in that particular instance, though, the owner is the one getting the credit. How can you make less than $40,000 a year and rent out homes? That would be a unique wrinkle that I'd like to see somebody try to test. But maybe there is a weird scenario, but it'd be difficult to have that kind of income.
Mr. Burke, you had another question.
Thank you. As I listened to the list of different research that the city would do, I wondered, now we would only do the research after a person puts in an application. And so do we have any guesstimate of the amount of time each application would take staff to go and produce all the documents, or is that on the applicant to do?
There are some of these that the applicant could bring in. We could certainly advertise for it. Depending on who would be coming in, we'd obviously want to be as helpful as we could. Really can't give a guess because having not gone through it or anything like this, I really don't know how many times it would be. I just don't know. Somebody could come in and just have everything in front of them in the file folder, and we don't have to look anything up, and the copies are all there, and the other person could just be coming in saying, I know about this, could you please help me through it? And we'd be remiss if we didn't help them through it.
I think most of the merits of this are great, but what I don't want to have happen over time is get to the point where this grows into a state where we need maybe an extra half position because we've added so many things to the plates of the staff. And this is something we talk about at school all the time. People that write policy love to put more on people's plates to do underneath carrying out the policy, but we never take anything off of the plates of the people that are doing the work. And so I'm very cognizant of the staff's burden, even though it is a service to our taxpayers, which I think is very, very admirable.
Mr. Barber?
Well, Mr. Burke, I would respond. Most of the proofs on there that the staff would be required to participate in, most of those could be taken care of in less than 5 minutes. I can find actually the assessed value of your house, and I can pull the warranty deed on your house, all free searches, all through the county websites in just a matter of minutes. So the actual proof that the staff would independently have to do, with the exception of verifying a tax, you know, like a no tax due situation, minutes. Not, you would never have to hire, I mean, we'd have to have 1,000 applicants to require manpower on that.
Mr. Barber? Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For the record, I like the idea. I mean, I really do. You and I talked about it, and I think, you know, your gut hits you, you know, able to give something back. I like it. But kind of to give you the Reader Digest version, I think what we maybe should do is set $10,000 aside and then take a look at this and not jump the gun on it, because I do now have the rental property question. And, you know, you talked about 5 minutes. What happens, you know, if this is going to be appealed? Somebody comes in and says, well, you looked up my information, that's incorrect, this is not correct, I've been here for more than 25 years. You know, we need to come up with kind of an appeal process. Who's going to manage that? We speculate it could be 5 seconds, 10 seconds to look something up, but we haven't done it yet. So I'd like to give staff some more time to really kind of look at it, come up with really all the questions and all, you know, all the answers, and then actually put a program together that's going to meet expectations. The thing I don't want is to have, you know, council meetings where we have people at the end of council meetings coming up and complaining because they weren't part of the, you know, whatever we call this, but the tax refund, and you know, rightly so or rightly not, or if it's their mistake or our mistake, I don't want it to create a bad experience. This is something that if we do it, I want people to benefit from it and see the benefit from it. Living in the home for 25 years, staying here with the community, aging with the community, there's a lot of positives for it. But I again, like Councilman Burke said, I don't want this turned in that, you know, our 5, 6 years from now, our predecessors at the council have to add a FTE just to manage money that we're giving back, you know, we're giving back, type of thing. So I think we need to look at it very prudently and put some policies in place.
Go ahead. And Mr. Barber, I totally agree. In fact, that's what we're supposed to be doing tonight, not trying to decide the policy, but to just merely put the $10,000 aside to then get to the policy. We're not trying to solidify this entire thing to go into effect next week. We're just saying we like the idea, just like we did with the emergency management idea. Do we discuss the idea of putting some money with an intent to look into it? I'm just saying we have a base framework to justify the 10,000, now not 70, but about 10,000. And then we go in and explore these technicalities, these loopholes, forecasting, things of that sort. So you're absolutely correct.
Go ahead, Ken.
Can I add just one more thing? And I'm going to take the blame for this, but it's a little bit of criticism. When we got that document up on the dais, I assumed that was from staff, and I wasn't here. I guess you handed that out to everybody. But what I would ask, if somebody brings us a document, you know, put who it's from or label it in some way, because I assumed it, when I saw the 70,000, I thought it was from staff, and of course I figured Mr. Fairborn put it together, and that 70 grand probably was 7,000 or 8,000 actually. So that's why I didn't have a whole lot of questions. Seriously, I know how he does budgets. So, and again, I take the blame for that. I'm not blaming you. I should have asked. So, but I'm just saying it would be nice if we get a piece of paper, you know, just like a memo or an email, who it's from and that type of thing. So, but that's it.
Mr. Holman.
Thank you, sir. I would agree. I'm good with, we'll set the 10,000 aside. Let's look into this and see what we need to do to make it workable. My question, I guess, is a technical one from an operational standpoint. Based on what we passed at our last meeting, do we have the freedom to basically do that, or do we need to make changes at the next meeting next week?
Yep. Mr. Fearborn?
It would require an amendment. Right now, the budget as it stands includes all of the items that you see up there. If you were going to reduce this amount to the 10, you would, anything that you would be adding tonight or adding next week would be part of an amendment that goes next week. Anything that you talk about tonight that you think you still want to be bringing forward next week that hasn't been discussed, and then this one would have to be rolled back to the 10, if that was the council's desire. But that would have to be verbalized because it's already in.
Okay. Mr. Berenson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also agree with a lot of the comments from Councilman Burke and Councilman Barber. I do support it. I'd like to just add one suggestion for further discussion later on, that perhaps if we're going to have somebody sign an affidavit for AGI, that we could sign that the house is owner occupied too. I mean, I know it's probably rare that we have a rental property or multiple, but if we're going to do this, I do believe they should be occupying the home.
I believe the language proposed, I stated lives in the home.
Okay.
So but that was only by implication. I think that would be good to clarify that.
All right, appreciate that. Thank you. That's all I had.
Anyone else? I don't see any more hands. The only thing as mayor, what I see is that my concern is that we've already done some pretty great due diligence on our part, on your part, by allowing the tax levy to roll back, by reducing the fees for water deposits. Those are things that affect the entirety of our population here, not just a infinitesimal amount of people that we're talking about here and spending time and effort to talk about. It may be really important to one person, but as a totality, I just don't see the benefit to our community when we've already done a couple of things just since I've been on the board here or on the council with you all that have been substantive in nature. And this one seems to be such a management issue that I know I don't have a vote, but I'm hoping that you listen to me, that I just don't think that it's good legislation. I just don't see it as a benefit to all of our people, as we have seen as a benefit and a couple of other things that this group has pushed forward. And that's just my opinion on that. I've seen communities do this and that, touches on things that have long-term effects, and they're not doing well today. And so I would be remiss if I just didn't give you my opinion on that. So there you go. Go ahead.
And I really am not going to give a direct counterpoint to that. I mean, I respect that too, and that's why I wanted to be modest about this, because I do think that you can start any project with good intention, and then by the time it gets done, it's manifested and distorted itself beyond what the original intent is. I do think that at least there is, it is an effort to try to speak to the idea of the community for all ages, and that there is kind of a long-range message that can be sent here. When you move here, I mean, come home to more, well, we want people to stay. I mean, in fact, you know, we want to, I mean, that was part of the slogan that we had talked about, and that's really kind of just what the intent is here, is to say, you know, if you want to live here for 25 years, you know, there's a benefit there. We want you to stay longer. To be honest with you, when I hear $8,500, I'm kind of mildly disappointed, in the sense that I would love to do a little more. I mean, we're sitting there with $1.1 million, and we're not even 10% into that yet. And we're almost done. So the idea was, yeah, if a few more people do take advantage of that, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing if it brings stability to a community. But I respect the fact that, yes, something like this, especially since we're not solidifying it yet, since we're just talking about it, I don't necessarily disagree that a good project can go south real fast. So I hope that, I would almost agree with the temperament as we proceed in discussing this. But I do think there is a vision for our seniors, and respectfully, some of us around the table who, when they saw that 65, went, I'm a lot close to that number than I'd like to believe. But that we would want, that's payback for the earlier criticism. But, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Anyone else? All right, well, let's move on to the next item under the budget. We've got a couple of other issues that have been proposed, and I'll let those folks speak to that. So, Mr. Fearborn, do you have something?
Thank you, sir. Councilmember Kellogg, through the mayor, had brought up the possibility of an expanded program for the permeable pavers on 58 Highway. Sir?
Oops. I guess there's a more on page.
One for you guys. Great.
One of my skills.
Mr. Crass has allowed me to speak to this, and I'm sure he'll tap on my shoulder if I make any mistakes on the details of this. The essence of what you see here is the locations that are already programmed on sheet number 1 for next year are in green. Derby Drive, Mott Drive, Skyline, Sunset, North Park, North Woodson Drive, North High Drive. The possibility of adding some without a major disruption in traffic flow while we were doing them at the same time, and actually being able to get them done within the season for this, we could add 3 locations to it. We could do across Sunset Lane, so Sunset would be done on both the north and south side. Appaloosa Drive and Arabian could all be added. You see those in the yellow. The amount programmed right now, which is a tight amount for this project, is $114,465. To add those 3 locations would add an additional $62,220 to the project for next year. The total then for 2018 for this project to get these 9 locations done would be $176,685.
Ellen, you want to speak to that, or did you have something else? Or you got something else?
Then
Okay.
on page 2 of this, you see what, if those items were done in that order, those 3 streets were added, the future program would be fiscal year 2019, $186,660 to get the locations that you see in red, and then the final locations at Skyview and Sunrise in 2020, $41,970. If the council wished to only program the 114,465, all of these would be pushed back by 1 year. The 62,220 would be spent then in 2019 for the other 3 locations. Then 2020, we would program in 186,660, and 2021, 41,970 would be the phasing that staff is currently recommending.
Okay. Go ahead, Kevin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for bringing this up during the last work session, and I appreciate everybody's questions that they had. When I got home, that was, like I say, I think I was number 3 or number 4 to watch the video. The reason why I would like to expand this is because it brings such, beauty's a word, but that's not really what I'm looking for, but an attractiveness to our main strip through Raymore, and the appearance of those entryways into our neighborhoods, to me, is very important. You know, that added so much on Huntsman, in my opinion, and I was surprised that it was so well received. And the benefit that came out of it, there's many different benefits. When I asked staff to research this, my concern is that if we were to expand it or accelerate it so fast next year, what would it do to the traffic flows going out on 58? My last thing that I want to do is create bottlenecks all the way up and down 58. I know it had to be choreographed in a way that would allow people to take other routes and such. So the other concern that I had is the materials used, and I've spoken with staff. Staff has chosen materials that are very, what's the word I'm looking for? Very well sought after.
They're static. They'll be here next year and the year after.
That they match, that they're cohesive throughout town, that we have a red, orange, and turn it into green eventually as you go east. Then the readiness of the material, that it's there when it needs to be done. And then also, if the crews are able to get it done with an accelerated schedule. So with that there said, I see that we're looking at 3 additional intersections, all on the north side of 58 towards the post office, which I really like. What I like about that is that it puts the 19s being done basically from the Sonic all the way down just past Farmers Market. We'll get those all done at the same time, the same year is what I'm saying. Then that would leave us with the 2 down at the very east end, Skyview and Sunset. I guess my wishes is, and hopes, is that we could get this done with the biggest visual impact as soon as possible. And that's my goal. That's my wish, I guess. But I also heard you guys' concerns, and very valid, but you also deserve to know why I brought this up. If there's any questions, I'd be glad to.
Mr. Holman, I'm sorry.
I'm in support of Councilmember Kellogg's idea here. It's a program we're going to do anyhow. It's a multi-year program. This is just advancing it a little bit. It's a fairly modest amount in both money and actual implementation that staff, I'm assuming by presenting this to us, is saying they won't be overwhelmed and we won't have traffic issues, and so it seems like a reasonable item to put in there.
Okay. Everybody good with that? Mr. Moorhead?
I was going to say, I don't know of any concerns over this. I think it's a fantastic project.
Thank you.
So we should add 62,220 up there?
Mr. Burke has something.
Oh, Mr. Burke, yeah.
Real quick. By doing these 3 and then having the other 2 sections be in 19 and 20, we probably will save money by moving the whole project up a year that way. And over the long course of this whole project, we'll actually save a little bit of money in materials and construction costs. So in a way, moving it forward for those 3 it's a win-win.
Thank you. Mr. Barber, okay, all right. Okay, we'll move on to the next item. Oh, you do? Okay.
I apologize, and this goes to the map, because I thought about this up front, especially with the support of this. There are a number of people that live on Crest Sir, and I know that the Optimists have a bus stop there, because there are children that get off there. Would there be a reason to add Crest as an additional one?
Mr. Moorhead, I'd be absolutely in support of that, even going down to Evans. The thing that I also asked staff about here just recently, didn't we just approve some more plats in there of some more development that could possibly be bringing more egresses and ingress to 58? You know, I mean, there's so much land in there, you know, but that's also, you know, those there fall into what you're talking about there on Crest. I would think that would fall to the 20 if we did choose to do that. Maybe I'm wrong, but also I've been on council long enough that we've accelerated the sidewalk program at least 3 different times on my time on the council. But no, I'm in favor of every crosswalk going from east to west on 58 with this here. That way, that cohesiveness, minus the private streets, of course, but yeah, excellent question.
The staff's issue in not doing those is we have no way to get the people out of there.
We what?
There's no way for them to get out. You're blocking their street.
Oh.
If you would just fund that, if you would just fund that helicopter for us, sir.
There you go. Well, but I will say, and Mr. Kellogg brings up the point about maybe in 2020, I know with some future development there will be some attachment that, if anything, that comment could be just food for thought as kind of maybe catching it later in this cycle, in these cycles, when there is the ability to get it.
Absolutely, when they're on, for sure.
One of my biggest things since we did the one on Huntsman and the possibility of expanding this throughout the whole city is that this not get lost or become a non-priority, or that, you know, that we've changed our mind, is that, you know, I see the value in this, and I don't want it to go half feathers. I really don't. And I know my colleagues that I serve with right now are supportive.
They are. Mr. Berenson, did you have something?
Yeah, quickly, thanks, Mr. Mayor. He had mentioned Crest. There's a lot of commercial traffic on Crest. Will this stuff hold up?
You mean Evans?
Evans, I'm sorry, yes, Evans. Yep. Will this hold up very well with heavy commercial traffic? We'll be okay with that? I'm getting nods down there. That's not a problem.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, there is some heavy traffic. The point I was going to ask about too. Good call.
Not me driving on there, but other people.
Okay. Anything else? All right. Well, let's move on to the next item. Mr. Fearborn.
Thank you, sir. I would ask the chief to make presentation on this item.
Okay.
I had been asked to take a look at information regarding our police patrol bicycles. We currently, our current complement of bicycles, we have 2. We have 3 certified riders within the department. Obviously, our preference would be to have 1 per shift to get more folks out there. But the current bicycles that we have are Fuji bikes, and they're 7 years old. And so they have reached, close to the end of their usable life. We don't use them, obviously, as often as departments that have full-time bicycle patrols, but we would like to use them more often. We have a number of events here in Raymore, and our bicycle officers would like to get out there much, much more often than they are currently able. For events like, we use them for the Fall Festival, we like to use them on trails, and at other events as well. So in just doing some research based on this request, as I mentioned, we're currently using Fuji bikes. The Trek bicycle is much more heavy duty, and is, we reached out to some IPMBA trainers, that's the International Police Mountain Bike Association, and folks who provide training here in the area, and have trained our current bicycle officers to look at both pricing, the type of equipment that we would need on those bikes, and hopefully, if we do make a bicycle purchase, keep that purchase and that maintenance right here in Raymore. So I have some pricing on the bikes, if that would be helpful. They're close to $1,600 just for the bicycle without the equipment, and that's without lights, that's without the saddlebags for equipment, and water bottles and other things that are necessary to put on those bikes. But about $2,000 per bike once you equip all of them with all the necessary equipment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A while back, I had the opportunity with Councilman Townsend to tour the police department. I think I mentioned that in one of the meetings, and that was one of the things that caught my eye were the older Fuji bikes. I actually have an artist rendering. They look something like this.
Sorry.
So you have to wear a top hat with it, I think. They were older bikes, and I had asked Councilman Kellogg to give me some input, because I know he's a cyclist, and we both kind of thought that they definitely needed some newer equipment, so definitely in support of that.
Okay, anyone else? Mr. Kellogg.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Berenson. I spoke with city manager today about it and asked what the need was, and my understanding is 3, possibly 4 bicycles. I believe there's some benefit to it that we may not even realize. I spoke with Mr. Feuerborn about that and kind of challenged him to work his Feuerborn magic possibly with other avenues, So I support this, the fact that the staff will use them, When it was first brought up, I had some reservations. Are we just spending money to be spending money to say we're spending money on the police department? And I don't feel that today there is need. I didn't realize that the bicycles were sold that they are, Quite frankly, if they're a Fuji, you're not going to get me on it, so I can't expect our police officers to get on it because I've ridden them. But, I think there's more benefit to it, and this is something that not just only our police department would benefit out of bicycles, but maybe other departments too, But that's something that I challenged our city manager with today to think about. So I'm in support of this. I just don't know how many bicycles are needed or would actually be utilized, I don't want to force somebody to use them, but if they're willing to, by golly, I think it'd be fantastic to outfit them with it.
Anyone else? So is there a recommendation? Ms. Abdel, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I have a quick question first. Chief, did you say there are 3 officers trained?
There are currently 3 people certified. We have a number of other officers who've expressed interest, but...
So if we propose more than 3 bikes, would it make sense that we need to be sure there's money to train other officers in the budget as well?
Yes, we have local IPIMBA trainers here. One of the individuals we reached out to do this research has advised they'll come down and do the training for us right here on site. So we can do that relatively inexpensively.
I know Kevin put up 4 fingers. I'm opposed to that. As the former chief, and I'm not wanting to put words in the chief's mouth, but you're not going to get 4 on a bike at any given time. We don't have enough people to do that. There is a reason that you're in a patrol car out there. I could see 2 at a time, and at special events, maybe 3 at a time. But even most of the time, we're only going to have 1 out there who's actually going on patrol, and the others are going to have to work the streets. I mean, I don't know, am I right or am I wrong? I could be old-fashioned here, or I want to hear from the chief, though. I want to hear from the chief.
Actually, sir, it's really more a matter of size. As we were doing the research, one of the things that IPIMBA they wrote an article on their website that talked about how to select a mountain bike or the appropriate bike for patrol. He said a lot of police departments make mistakes buying a one-size-fits-all bike. And so what happens is it's just as dangerous for a very tall or large officer to ride a small bike as it is for a small officer to ride a standard size. So a lot of police departments will buy a 29-inch bike, and the small officer then is precluded from riding that bike. Or they buy smaller bikes, and then it's dangerous for the officers. So really, we would be doing a range of different sizes based on the officers that would like to be certified.
Okay, that makes sense. All right. Mr. Moorhead.
What's the rough cost for 3 bikes? I'm sorry, I'm blanked out here.
2,000 a bike.
2,000 a bike. So we're talking $6,000 here?
8,000. Or 8,000. So they have a variety of sizes.
Then I'll make the recommendation to fund this for 8,000.
Everybody good with that? Put it on the budget. 8,000?
I'm good with that as long as Chief doesn't feel like we need to add a little bit more money for that
For training.
or is that already in your budget?
Actually, no, the research that we did was 9,851 for 4 bikes completely outfitted, and that included training, a training component in there as well, so.
So 10 grand.
10
Let's
grand.
make it 10.
All right. Mr. Berenson, did you have something? That was what it was? Okay, all right. All right. Cool. Yeah, I didn't even think about the size thing. All right, let's move on to the next thing. Furniture and finishings.
I'll ask Mr. Cataret.
Thank you, sir. As part of the organizational changes that Mr. Feuerborn implemented earlier this year, one of the discussions we had was the benefits of relocating economic development, Mr. Tapp, over to the community development area. Mr. Tapp is under my supervision now, and we work very closely together on a lot of projects, and we did feel there would be benefit to move him over to the west side of the building. I have a rough sketch here, nothing as colorful as Mr. Crass's drawing, but it will show you what we're proposing. Right now, what we have in community development are 3 permanent offices and then a fairly large open space. The open space currently has 3 employees located within it. What we'll be talking about is utilizing one of the offices that we currently have for Mr. Tapp, because he does need an area to be able to meet with individuals in a private manner. And so we would add a 4th individual out to the common area. And rather than looking at permanent changes to that open space, which can be costly, once you start putting up permanent walls, we're having to deal with HVAC items, we're having to relocate lighting. What we're proposing to do is basically 4 cubicle spaces. These would be somewhat temporary in nature, so if things were to change, we could easily relocate the furniture items. The furniture would actually be freestanding, so it's not actually cubicle, furniture attached to the walls. So there is some flexibility in that area. What we're talking about, overall expense, we have the purchase of the walls and the furniture. We have a little bit of electrical work to provide, again, the outlets necessary for 4 employees out there, some moving of the telephone data lines, and then we're going to be moving one door. The door to the office for the economic development director would actually be reused. We would simply move it to provide more of a corridor space to get access to that office. Overall, budget-wise, we're at $15,000 to accomplish all that work. Again, it provides space for each of the 4 employees, but more importantly, gets Mr. Tapp relocated over to the community development area. So that's the proposal we have.
Someone coughed when you said the number. Can you repeat the number, please?
15,000. Thank you.
Councilmember Moorhead and I suggested that they could have one of these tables, a chair, and a roll of Les Nessman duct tape to make walls. It's a lot cheaper than $15,000. But no, I'm in support of this. This is very straightforward. It's a good idea. If it needs an official sponsor, count me as so. I'm in support of the idea for $15,000.
Very good. You must be nodding thumbs up. Go ahead and
up there? Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cadillac. Turn the page over. There are a couple of more items on the agenda. Next one being lock boxes.
I'll ask Chief to make a presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Fearborn. An original expansion item request from the PD is for cargo boxes for the Patrol Explorers. When we transitioned from the Chargers to the Ford Explorer, we lost all of our trunk storage space. Our police officers carry a considerable amount of equipment necessary for the day-to-day operations, not limited to fire extinguishers, first aid kits, evidence processing materials, flashlights, batteries, radio equipment, breaching tools, which Mr. Zur could probably tell you about that. But all of those things that we had previously carried in the trunk of a police car is now left exposed in the back of the Explorer. And so it's, excuse me, it's as much of a organization issue. The officers, we use some Rubbermaid tubs back there, but, when they're looking for that equipment, sometimes it's gotten banged around, it's gotten torn up, or they're unable to find it. But it's also a security issue for us. When all of that equipment is exposed in the back of the Explorer, it's open to view, by somebody passing by the car, and some of that equipment, again, radios, batteries, things like that, are high-dollar equipment. We also have, difficulty sometimes with patrol rifles and other things that we need to secure out of sight of view as well. So I didn't print out one for each of you all, but these are the boxes that are specifically manufactured for the rear of the Patrol Explorers. So this is the type of box that would be installed in the back of each one of our patrol cars.
Oh, go ahead, Mr. Burke.
Thank you. There was an article in the Kansas City Star, I read it today on their online, but talked about the number of unsecured weapons when someone goes to, Arrowhead and they need to go into the game, they can't bring their gun in, and the need for individuals to have lock boxes. And I read that, I'm like, I almost wanted to go buy one even though I didn't have anything to put it in it at the time. But because it's such an important, fact of life in our town especially as well. And if you look through our reports, I certainly would want the police to have that as well.
Mr. Callahan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I support it. Another thing that I think about is because I've witnessed auto accidents, and when I hear about Rubbermaid tubs in the back of an SUV, and I remember the minivan rolling 6 times on 435 that day when I saw that, that's what I worry about that. I don't ever want to see our officers get in an accident, but it does happen. With this here, it'd be bolted to the carcass, the frame. It would be locked, and it would add that element of security, especially with some of the things that they carry around that they're required to carry around. Something happened and that officer's incapacitated. I want that equipment as secure as possible.
Mr. Holman.
I'm in support of it as well. Another thing that probably doesn't come up as often, but it's certainly relevant, is when our officers have to recover firearms or weapons from other people. Again, if you have to transport that, you don't have a trunk anymore, you got to put it in the floorboard. Somebody rear ends you, you have to go to a hot call or something. Now you got a weapon bouncing around in the car. You don't want that, so I'm in support of it as well.
Good point. Okay. And that is, what was the amount on that?
$20,000. The boxes are $1,500 apiece, but they'll be delivered and installed for the additional amount. So it's $20,000 for all 10 of the vehicles.
Okay. And we got that up there?
Yes, sir.
All right. Let's move on to the next item, the drone program.
Call on Chief.
Okay, thank you, sir. The members of the police department in recent times have successfully witnessed the value of drones being used in law enforcement, crime scene oversight, search for missing children, dementia and mental health patients, and suspects as well. For example, a recent example, the city communications drone was utilized for a large outdoor crime scene. Unfortunately, that drone is not equipped with infrared. So using that drone, to search for a body heat signature would not have been, we would not have been able to use that. We're going to be using the footage from that drone, the city communications drone, and again, that was an outdoor domestic violence cutting call. We'll be using that as courtroom testimony. So obviously, we've seen the value, and it'll be significant going forward in the prosecution of cases. But we've had the opportunity, the missing individual, the young woman that drove off the boat ramp up in the Missouri River, they're able to cover miles and miles of area searching for individuals when we have, missing children or missing elderly folks within our community. We just see all sorts of application for the use of drones here in Raymore and beyond, because obviously it would be a resource that we would want to share with the folks in the surrounding area as well.
Yeah, it's a great program. Any comment? Mr. Holman, you want to comment on that?
I'm in support of this one as well. It's just going to move the police department even further into the current technology scenario that they're going to be forced into, whether we do this tonight or not. It enhances their capabilities in a number of areas. An Amber Alert, a Silver Alert, a mental person that's wandered away from the house, a crime scene search, accident reconstruction. It goes on and on. I think it's a very valuable tool. I think this is a great program. I'm completely in support of this.
Mr. Barber.
I'm supportive. It's a lot cheaper than a helicopter.
My people wanted a helicopter. This was a trade-off.
What was the amount, Chief?
I'm sorry, $30,000, and just to kind of explain what that number actually means, the FLIR-capable live streaming with thermal imaging and still photography drone will be between $15,000 and $20,000. It's very high technology. But we recognize, because it's such significant technology and it's very expensive, that dollar amount also, we've built in a practice drone, because I don't want my people crashing the really expensive one. And so a practice drone for those people who we have designated will be training and flying the drones when it gets deployed. That training alone is $1,500 per pilot. So that $30,000 price tag includes the training for our folks, the FAA certification, which is required for everyone, and again, a small training drone, a Phantom Pro with a hard case and batteries, and then dedicated laptop computers for the navigation of the drones as well. So that includes all of those things to be able to operate.
Okay. Sonia.
I don't think I can support this, because if you pick my husband, he'll never come home.
He actually was one of the people. I apologize.
Mr. Berenson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Real quick, Chief, what kind of warranty do these come with? I know they're very expensive. Do they come with a service contract, any kind of warranty after the sale?
Yes, they do come with a warranty, and depending on the type of warranty that we would get, we're also looking at, I didn't mention that in the pricing, but we are looking at a relatively new addition to drone packages, which is a parachute. So that if your drone starts to lose power, that it won't, crash down on people, and that we would be able to deploy a parachute so that, we're not crashing, really expensive equipment. But yes, in the folks that we've talked to with Mavic and some of the other drone, Phantom, they've got all across the board packages for us to be able to warranty the piece of equipment.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Kello.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just kind of curious, I like this, the idea of this, and I think it's fantastic. I support it. I'll opine on this, that's more expensive than what the truck Mr. Feuerborn said that he could buy. But I'm kind of curious, what does staff know what type of lifespan we'd get out of this? How many, the hours usage? I mean, it's a heck of a lot cheaper than a Robinson 44, but it's, I'm just curious what the life cycle would be suspected out of this. Not that it would change my support.
Chief?
I don't know, sir, but I can find out exactly. We met with Captain Greg Williams, who is actually the head of the drone program for the Kansas City Police Department. I had the opportunity to go out, and I actually brought him to the Metro Chiefs to do a demonstration of the drones. And so, Greg is the one, and of course, they're flying them in Kansas City all the time. But I know that they have, lifespan, a certain number of hours, flight hours, but he's been flying theirs for a couple of years now and with no stopping. So, I can certainly find that out for you.
Mr. Feuerborn?
Thank you, sir. More than likely, considering the cost of the item and your point well taken relative to the truck, sir, this would be an item that once we know the lifespan on it, in addition to the one we have in communications, we'd be adding this to the equipment replacement fund so that we don't see a spike.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mr. Townsend?
Mr. Feuerborn answered it. I was going to ask if this is a shared resource with the communications department, but obviously they have a separate one.
Anybody else? And the amounts up there? Have that added in? Drum program? Okay, cool.
And then the staff appreciation dinner. Mr. Feuerborn?
This is Councilmember Holman's item, sir.
Mr. Holman?
Thanks, sir. The amount I want to put into the budget is $8,500, and it is for a staff appreciation dinner, but it actually has 3 components, and it scales the spectrum from one to the other, with the one in the middle kind of connecting the two. So bear with me as I explain this. Now, I've talked to a number of you over the years about the possibility of us doing a staff appreciation dinner. I think that this is something we've got to do. Consider the fact, first of all, of everything that our staff does year after year. And by staff, I would include certainly Mr. Zur and all the work that he's done for us as well. But the work that they do to keep this city running every day at top notch, their professionalism level that increases every time that we get a report up here at a meeting. All right. I want to remember, too, those of you that haven't experienced this yet, but every year the ERC invites us to their dinner. I call it the holiday dinner, if you will. They pay dues for that. We don't. They invite us. We don't pay anything to go to that and bring our guests with us. We can't give them a bonus by state law, correct, Mr. Feuerborn? Correct. We would like to use Mr. Feuerborn's words, pay each of them $1 million. It's just not feasible. This, to me, is a very small token to show our appreciation to them of the great job that they're doing. I put an amount in there of roughly about $4,800 to $5,000 for that, and that's a numbers-based scenario. If there's 100 employees, 9 of us, Mr. Zur, roughly 110 people plus 1 guest at roughly $20 to $25 a plate. And we're probably not going to use that because when they do the ERC dinner, everybody gets invited, but not everybody shows up or is able to show up. So we probably won't need quite all that money, but I just want to make sure that we've got enough. I would recommend that we conduct this at Centerview. I mean, it's because of the positive review we got from our citizens and this group that building is possible for us to use now for events just like this. The second component of this is to have a regional talent group come in and put on a 1 to 2 hour music show during this event. And part of the purpose of that is, again, to pay back staff for all the hard work they've done. But it has a secondary purpose. It introduces a regional level talent, and the one I've talked to and got a number from would be a one night. I suggested a 1 hour show. They said they could do 2 if we wanted. It wouldn't change the price. It would be about $2,500, $2,600. That's them bringing their own equipment in. But that shows people from that industry outside the area what we have to offer, because we're going to be opening that amphitheater soon. And people are going to say, Raymore, what is this, when we try and book acts? Also, it introduces everybody in this room. It introduces our city leaders as well as our staff to just a B-lister regional level talent that you'll really enjoy. for a relatively reasonable price. And then the third end of that, which I've spoken with Mr. Ike about this, would be a one-day consultancy with that same group to review all of our entertainment venues, those that are already constructed, such as Centerviews, as well as those to be constructed, the amphitheater and TB Hanna Station, to this same group, and let them come in for 8 hours and work with Mr. Ike and give him an industry performer's perspective on what we're doing and what we're about to do, what will work, what won't work, what issues they see from an entertainer's standpoint. And I've spoken with Mr. Ike. He thinks that this would be of great value going forward as we try and secure programming for all those new locations. So you can see it runs one end of the spectrum to the other. But the overriding emphasis on this is to provide staff a little something back beyond just their salary and the thank you that they get from us. We've never really done that in the past that I know of, and I think it's a great idea. So questions if anybody has them.
Mr. Berenson.
Did you say it was Justin Bieber? Who's the group?
The group I contacted with is a group called Brother South. They do a show in Branson. They do actually a variety of shows. They have about 5 or 6 canned shows that they do, if you will. They do an Alabama tribute. They do a 50s and 60s rock and roll show. They do a Kenny Rogers tribute, Waylon Willie and the Boys. I have the brochures. I've handed them back to Mr. Ike, and I'm not... Well, they do the Everly Brothers. Thank you, Mr. Moorhead. He remembers everything. And I'm not sure, but I think at least a few years ago, they maybe did some 80s contemporary rock like Journey. So we could do a customized program. I just said an hour, and when I talked to him and he gave me the price, he goes, if you want 2 hours, it won't cost any more because that's what we're used to doing. Another thing you'll like about that, these guys are really interactive with the audience. So it would really be a good time. But like I said, it was a little bit of a reach in my conversations with them. They didn't know where Raymore was at. They were excited that we have an amphitheater, but it was kind of, what would we be getting into? Well, that's one of the challenges we're going to have to overcome with entertainment as we start doing programming at these locations. So I think this is a great first step introduction. Our people will get to see them. They'll get to see us, and hopefully that word spreads out through the industry that we're for real and we're going to get some good talent in here.
Anyone else? Everybody good? Is it up there? 8,500? Okay, it is, all right. Does anybody else have anything else? Or budget, we're still talking about budget. Mr. Berenson, did you have something?
I have a quick other. For Mr. Fairborn, maybe I forgot about this, but did we allocate anything for the Parks and Rec Department to do the repairs to their facility that we talked about a month or so ago?
We have not yet, sir.
What was the amount they were needing? Was it $10,000 or $20,000? It was a relatively small amount, and they were going to do all of the work themselves.
I want to say that it was $20,000.
That's what I thought it was too. But I blame myself. Councilman Townsend and I got to tour this facility, and they had mentioned that they could use some funds for some renovation, much of which they wanted to do themselves in the winter months. This is the recreation building.
The park maintenance building has a kind of an issue in that, it's not kind of an issue, it's an issue. The building was built with a mezzanine, and the mezzanine is for storage, and it's a maintenance building, so you can imagine the type of storage that's being done up there. It's dirty storage, if you will, and it's immediately above all of the break room, the restrooms, and the offices for the park maintenance crew. So about every 2 weeks, you get about 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch of dust that overlays everything that's in those particular facilities. So their goal in the long term is, of course, to get a different building, an additional building on there. That's a lot of money. The goal in the short term is to reinforce the decking on the maintenance, on the mezzanine area, to provide a solid cover to those offices down below. and then do some work within the ceiling plenum itself to alleviate that problem. And they had estimated material, again, they would be doing it during the winter months. They estimated materials high, conservatively high, at about $20,000.
Is that something you're recommending? Okay. Questions, Ms. Burke?
Question, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like this has been reprogrammed a couple of times already in the last 5 years?
Different mutations of it, yes, sir.
That's what I thought. So we kind of
Keep the
we
can down the road
We kind of
anyway.
need to take care of them because they've been taking care of us while we've been reprogramming it.
Sure. Mr. Holman?
So this is, I'm guessing then an item in capital that's not, it's an unfunded capital item they keep listing each year is what Joe's saying, is that right?
It has actually disappeared. You may remember its latest mutation it was in with the fencing, the concrete pad. We had this huge gangly thing that was being proposed, and so this particular portion did get cut out. That's correct, sir.
So I'm good with the proposal, okay. So 20,000 for the Parks Maintenance Office?
Yes.
Is that what it is?
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Mr. Kellogg, did you have something? Not on budget. Okay. Anybody else have anything? If not, we'll move on to the other. So if you got something under other, Mr. Kellogg.
Yes, thank you. One thing we didn't touch on, page 4 of the agenda. Staff would further recommend the city council choose one of the alternatives for roundabout feature, that the roundabout itself be renamed. Possible alternatives from many. You have no idea how badly I'd love to rechange that from, let's get away from, a roundabout's gonna be a roundabout, but I'd love to call it something different than a roundabout. And I really like the honor circle, but that may not be appropriate.
Sounds good to me. What's anybody else think?
I think that's my intent.
Patriot
is that
Circle,
I'm
Honor Circle?
That
Or you
I
could go
believe I'm
Honor, Courage,
honoring
and
them.
Commitment Circle. Is that too long? Oh, darn. See? I had Mr. Townsend on my side.
You like that? Hoorah. That would be my suggestion, Mr. Mayor.
The Honor Circle?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I guess if we go in that direction, I mean, we've still got some work to be done by staff, I guess, once we kind of get a visual of the particular renderings that are approved by the group, then maybe we can move forward with that. That'd be all right?
Very good, sir.
Move forward with the name at that time. Anybody else have anything?
Would we be actually naming it the honor circle?
Well, I think
Instead
that's
of
the suggestion.
well, that really wasn't my intention, is that that's what we'd be designated as. But if we're going to actually, I'm even more in support of it, because basically, we don't really have a name for it. Everybody that talks about it is the Dean Roundabout to me. You know where it's at, of course, but we've never named it officially as a street name. Is that?
I don't think it'd have a street name, and just have a fixture name. The streets are still going to remain the same. It's just the site.
Support of it even more.
If there's nothing else, there a motion to move into executive session.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we move into executive session to discuss personnel matters as authorized by RSMO 610.021 subsection 3.
Second.
It's been made and seconded to go into executive session. Could I have a roll call?
Councilmember Kellogg?
Yes.
Councilmember Burke?
Yes.
Councilmember Townsend?
Yes.
Councilmember Barrington?
Yes.
Councilmember Barber?
Yes.
Councilmember Abdullah?
Yes.
Councilmember Holman?
Yes.
Councilmember Moorhead?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you to staff.
Go into executive session.
Would you like to have it here, sir?
A what?
Or do you want to go in there?
Let's go in there.
Very good.